Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, where I interview founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders, artists, and today, a fellow podcaster. I'm really looking forward to this interview. I have an amazing guest for you today. His name is Vlad Kostia. He is the host of the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. I'm really looking forward to this. Let's give Vlad a warm welcome. Vlad, welcome.
Hi, this is exciting. I finally get to talk to another podcaster.
No, it's great. It's great. I was thinking about making a whole new line of this, uh, instead of Crypto Hipster podcast or under the Crypto Hipster podcast, shooting from the hip with the Crypto Hipster. You know, so I might just do that. So thank you for joining me. And let's kick things off and ask you first. Kick things off. What's your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
I spent way too many years in university, I guess. I pursued a PhD. I was planning to become a university professor, and then Bitcoin happened. I've been aware of it since 2013, but I was afraid of it. And that's also the reason why I wrote a magazine that's called Breaking FUD that I also open sourced. You can find it on bitcointakeover.com in the magazine section. Basically, I did not touch Bitcoin for 4 years after I first found out about it. But when I did find out about it, everything changed. I dropped out in my last year of my PhD to pursue working in Bitcoin full time, to seek some work, understand how this works, do interviews for myself, just to convince myself that I made the right decision. And then once I discovered that there's nobody really behind this project, because you first get in, right? Everyone tells you, oh, it's a decentralized project, nobody controls it. And you say, oh, yeah, right. That's just what you tell people to convince them that this is a good investment. But then you dig deeper and you keep on searching for answers and you discover, okay, there's really, it's pure anarchy. That's what drives this project. It's pure anarchy. It's people from all around the world contributing. Of course, you have maintainers of the code, but these people are also overwhelmed and clueless most of the time. There is no roadmap. It's just based on the best design and community feedback from it. It's incredible. It's punk rock. It's DIY. I love it. I would rather do this as opposed to stay in some university office and do pointless research. I did try to do Bitcoin research in academia, and at the time it was rejected. They did not really understand what's the point of it. And also they told me that even if I'm potentially some sort of genius, they're not going to be able to review my work because there's no expert in Bitcoin in my department. And, as a PhD candidate, you're always regarded with skepticism, which is good. You need someone to be able to understand what you're saying there and where you're getting with this. And since there was no expert, I just dropped out. I realized, okay, maybe I need 10 more years before this becomes safe and I can write what I want about it. And I'm fine with it. If somebody else does it, that's perfectly fine. I'm in a good position right now, I guess. Much better than before. I do this Bitcoin Takeover podcast. I've been doing it for 5 years now. And I'm still excited. I still discover new stuff. I still interview new people. I don't get bored.
Nice. Well, so what year did you start in Bitcoin? Was 2019 or before that?
No, 2017, that was my official quote unquote start because I did hear about it before and I did need it before. I just didn't know that it works like this. All I knew about Bitcoin is that it's used on the Silk Road to buy drugs, and that was it.
Yeah, you and I both started in 2017. It's a different world today than it was back then. That was the wild, crazy West, right? So I want to get into the wild, crazy West and get, into your Bitcoin Takeover podcast, which is basically differs from mine. I interview people from all over in different chains and stuff, but your focus is Bitcoin, right? So, what's your podcast all about? What has been some of the greatest lessons you've learned, and how much you enjoy it, and what's it all about?
My podcast is intermediate level in the sense that I do my best to get developers, to get business founders, and all sorts of people who are super hardcore working on this 24/7. I get a lot of OGs. For example, this week I got Brian Bishop, who was on the Cypherpunk mailing list and actually found out about Bitcoin the day that it came out, and he was 19 years old at the time. He's pretty much a mad scientist, a genius from this point of view. But he didn't touch it. It took him also a few years until he figured out that it's not just another proposal and it's the proposal. It's the one that survives and it's the one that thrives and ends up becoming a multi-billion and even $1 trillion asset. It's really incredible, you know. You discover all of these people and you see that there's so much to find in this community. You don't have time to get bored. I'm pretty sure that you have founders from all sorts of blockchains and you have entrepreneurs and you have innovators and you always discover something new. But a pattern that you're going to figure out along the way is that the talk is always about something else. There's Bitcoin, and then there's something that changes gradually. That is the new kid in town, the new cool project that everyone talks about, and the next cycle it changes, and Bitcoin remains a constant. And maybe that it seems boring from afar, but you don't really have time to keep up with everything that's happening. There are so many projects, there are so many wallets, there are so many people working on them and tinkering and trying to work around the limitations of this project because Bitcoin is hard to change, you know? It's very hard to get the community to agree on anything, to upgrade it, to add any functions to it. So people search for all sorts of workarounds just for the sake of adding some extra functionality or having some feature that they desire. And it's fascinating to talk with them. I think right now, with season 15, I've interviewed mostly developers and people who came up with innovative ideas about Bitcoin. And if you listen to it as a whole, there's a YouTube playlist if you want to do that. I think it's future proof. I think 5 years from now, you're going to be listening to it again. Maybe some of this will become more mainstream, as in there's scaling technology like zero knowledge rollups, and there are some pretty avant garde sidechains that are being presented, and all sorts of ideas on how to make this work more efficiently. I think 5 years from now, it will still not come to fruition entirely. And it's still gonna be under debate. But people listening to this will understand where this comes from and where it originates. And for better and for worse, Bitcoin is taking it slow. It's worse because right now you can't onboard 6 billion people at once, not in a non-custodial way. Of course, they can buy paper Bitcoin from someone else, ETFs or whatnot. But it's also good because whatever gets added to Bitcoin is the most mature, the most tested, the technology that makes most sense. It's not the one that's on the cutting edge, on the bleeding edge. That's the stuff that ends up in altcoins, and that's the stuff that gets tested for a few years. But if it ever comes to Bitcoin, it must be very well tested. And somehow there is some reassurance in this. You sleep better at night knowing that nobody's doing wild experimentation with your asset.
There's this terminology back when I worked in corporate America said that the proper technology build is slowly incremental technology and not, fast, immediate hype based technology. And I put Bitcoin in that category of slowly incremental technology, right?
If you look at some of the most successful companies right now in electronics, you're going to see that Apple is not necessarily the most innovating when it comes to hardware, at least, or adding software features. They're always like 5 years behind Samsung or Google Pixel or whatever. But whenever they add something, it's more mature. has a much better user experience. It's something that you don't need a tutorial to understand. And I can also think, I'm not sure if you're into video games, but I do pay attention to that scene. And you
Yep.
have Nintendo, which for a few generations now hasn't had the most powerful hardware, but they do understand the importance of software optimization and working around some well-defined limitations. And it seems to work very well for them. They sell a lot of units specifically because of this. I see Bitcoin somehow within the same category, even if it's not a company. And I'm pretty proud of the project, even though sometimes I'm frustrated and I realize, okay, if we had better scalability, then there would be no point to have all of these altcoins to help it scale, to have low fees and stuff like that. If we had proper privacy, there would be no reason for Monero and Zcash and stuff like that to exist. But I guess I have to be more patient and understand that this stuff is still very young, is not mature enough. And you also need to figure out how to add it to a system like Bitcoin in a way that doesn't break it. So it takes experimentation first, and then it takes elegant engineering to make it happen. I just hope that the Wall Street suits don't entirely take control of the narrative, and we're not gonna end up with a version of Bitcoin which never gets improved, just because everyone is complacent and they only care about that number go up aspect of it. Because it has very cypherpunk roots, and it's supposed to be this form of internet money that you can transfer around the world that is sustainable in the sense that it builds a free market over time, but at the same time, it should also be accessible. So there is a very fine line there, which intersects these hopes and expectations. Another aspect is fungibility, which means that one unit should be equal with any other unit of it. That's something you have with cash, but it's not something we have with digital cash up to this point. Monero does a pretty good job accomplishing that, but it's still not perfect. It's still not that fine design that is needed. Because right now it seems like there's this triangle where you have to choose your trade-offs, there is this concept of the Zukos triangle that you find in computer science, and especially in this space. In cryptocurrency, Zukos triangle has been translated as scalability, privacy, and what's the other one? Security. You can't have all three of them. You basically have to choose two and work around the limitations. Maybe one day we're gonna be able to have proper cryptography, but today it is what it is,
The only thing I'm going to disagree with you on, I agree with mostly what you said, is calling Bitcoin internet money. I don't consider it internet money. I consider it probably the hardest form of money ever created. Um, Other than that, I agree with you. So let's talk about an off. Like, well, I actually want to find out from you, what is Bitcoin maximalism, and then we'll get into some of the myths and facts about it once you explain what that means.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. My background is in political science, and I had a fascination with political philosophy. And I think that Bitcoin maximalism is one of the most interesting political philosophies of our time. If you look at it, it makes a statement. It says either we should maximize Bitcoin, because there are multiple schools of thought, and they originate either from the Austrian economists or from the cypherpunks. The Austrian economists think that Bitcoin maximalism is monetary maximalism, which means that you should only hold BTC and nothing else. The cypherpunks, on the other hand, believe that Bitcoin maximalism is about maximizing what Bitcoin can do, and you're going to build everything on top of it. The term originates from a 2014 or 2015, I'm not sure exactly, but it's a blog post by Vitalik Buterin, the creator of Ethereum. And he was appealing to an article that somebody wrote at the time and said, whatever you do on Ethereum, we're going to do better on Bitcoin. And he analyzed the aspects of what can be built on Bitcoin, and he called it Bitcoin maximalism. So this is originally what this was about, that whatever happens in altcoins, Bitcoin is going to do better. But I think over time, it became more of an elusive term. Everyone started defining it however they want. To some, it means that you only hold BTC and nothing else. To others, it means that you become part of a cult where you only eat meat and you have to join regular meetings with other people and you have to show off your status with certain items that you're buying. I think right now maximalism has reached a more absurd point where it's a lifestyle and you have to signal your lifestyle by buying all the right products and being friends with the right people and going to the events. And that's how you show basically that you're part of the community. And yes, that's what makes you a maximalist. There's also the toxic maximalist aspect of it, which means you're going to be mean to anyone else who doesn't agree with you, which is something that every cult has to some degree. But in here, it's justified by some virtuous ideas. I don't know how I should present them. Like, you're supposed to tell people that they're idiots and that they should sell all of their altcoins and call them shitcoiners and stuff like that and think it's for the best, and tell them that over time you are the one who's holding the better performing asset and they're basically gamblers. There's some merit to this idea, but it doesn't always apply. And to some extent, I think Bitcoin maximalism became a dogma, which sometimes is trying to hide its head in the sand away from market realities. Because if you look at Ethereum or you look at Dogecoin, you're going to see that their market performance very much mirrors that of BTC. Of course, they're more volatile on the way down, and sometimes they also pump harder. But there's some correlation between certain coins, and they have been around for years. And some of them are useful for some use cases. So it's easy to deny and say, yes, we don't need this because Bitcoin is enough. But there's a whole market out there for trying new stuff. And it's good to understand that the intentions behind this market is to mature the technology, to mature proposals that maybe are not ready for Bitcoin. Maybe they will never be ready for Bitcoin, but it's good to try them. And there's another aspect to shitcoinery. That's what maximalist guys will call it. I think shitcoins are very useful for keeping regulators busy with something. Because if there was only Bitcoin, they would focus their attention only on Bitcoin. But if you have SafeMoon and all of these scams, they're gonna keep everyone busy. They're gonna grab the media's attention and they're gonna make Bitcoin look like a saint project or whatever. And they're also gonna keep government agents busy with investigations and everything else. So to some degree, these shitcoins are useful, but it doesn't mean that they're good investments. Usually they pump during the bull markets. They pump harder. Some people talk about 100x, 1000x, whatever. But you never know when you should sell. And that's the problem. Because people buy into them. They buy into some narrative. These altcoins are organized in a way that they have pre-mines, they have initial investors who get more tokens and they get the largest majority of the supply, and then they pay for marketing. And by the time you hear about it, it's probably kind of late, so you should not be too greedy. Because if you get into this game and you follow some YouTuber or influencer or Twitter shitposter or whatever, cartoon character, they're going to tell you, yes, this is the investment, you should get it now, but you're not going to know that they get paid to say that, and you're not going to know that you might be pretty late at the party, and you should not get too greedy, because if you do get too greedy, you're going to end up becoming the bag holder, And this is where the shitcoin aspect comes around, because very few of these coins come back after a bear market. You get this bear cycle, people move on to the next thing. VC investors already set up their portfolios with shiny new ideas and new narratives, and you're gonna end up holding the bag. But if you only buy Bitcoin, that's not going to happen, because it's, how should I put it, the centerpiece. It's the center of the world when it comes to this industry. And for as long as the industry is around, Bitcoin is king, and everything gravitates around it. Nothing can succeed unless Bitcoin succeeds. But you have to not be greedy, I guess, if you care about the long term.
You said a couple of things that I want to follow up on. One, you made a very interesting distinction that I had not made before. Um, Cypherpunk versus Austrian economics. I've always viewed Bitcoin from an Austrian economics perspective as money, and all the other shit coins as technological advancements that are necessary coming from the world of corporate America. How I would apply that into certain departments or areas, right? I never looked at it from a cypherpunk point of view. So maximalism is different from Austrian economics and cypherpunk, right? What do you see as the ideal world for both of those maximalists under both of those different situations?
It's hard because Austrian economists, basically, they only care about BTC, the token, and they look at the network and they say, is it secure right now? Yes. Then we don't care about anything else. It's kind of hypocritical because some of them endorse custodial ways of handling Bitcoin, and they say, yeah, banking is natural, banking is normal, we should embrace it, it helps scale the project. Why are you so angry about it? But then cypherpunks will say, but the point of Bitcoin is not to pump indefinitely. The point of Bitcoin is to be able to hold your own keys, to be financially sovereign in a way that no government can confiscate your money, no government can stop you from transacting, and ideally you should also have a degree of privacy against the government. So this is the cypherpunk point of view. It's not necessarily about sound money or getting rich. It's more about having these advantages that Bitcoin as a system has, as opposed to traditional financial system. So it's delicate. There needs to be a fine line where Austrians can agree on certain upgrades to keep the cypherpunks happy, and the cypherpunks agree that they should not create inflation or something like that, because that's what destroys the Austrians and makes them go away. They only care about the fixed supply, and this whole narrative of Bitcoin becoming maybe the only form of payment or the store of value, I think. I think cypherpunks are more concerned with medium of exchange, with being able to make fast payments around the world. And Austrian economists are more into savings and store of value. So they're not polar opposites. There is some middle ground between these two, but it's delicate because it's hard to meet everyone's expectations. And I think Bitcoin underwent a cypherpunk upgrade with Taproot and Segwit. And the Austrians, who have been around and stuck around with the project, they don't seem very happy with the fact that Bitcoin added some extra functions that they were not aware of. And it's going to be interesting in the future. I personally follow Paul Stortz, and he's proposing this sidechain system. It's called drive chains, where everyone gets their own sidechain to do whatever they want. And the point of this is that every project, if in the future they're no longer profitable with their own coin, they can just migrate to a Bitcoin sidechain. They can have all the features without having its own token. It's gonna be all backed by BTC. Everything is gonna be under this 21 million system. And I think that's pretty beautiful.
Interesting. Um, I want to talk about the when I got into Bitcoin in 2017, because I was in Bitcoin first, and then I discovered Ethereum months later. Um, I got in after I was laid off in corporate America, right? I was thrown onto the sidelines, right? I feel Bitcoin back then was a way for people who were thrown onto the sidelines to get back into the game. And that's what appealed to me. Over the years, Wall Street got involved. You have all these ETFs. You have, you know, you mentioned it earlier. You hope that Wall Street doesn't bastardize the future and the current of Bitcoin. How is that freedom that was once promised by Bitcoin? Is that freedom still available, or is that fading because of Wall Street?
There is still freedom, and you can use Bitcoin as a non-custodial sovereign system. You can run your own node, you can transact with anyone around the world, you can mine it, you can participate this system in ways that don't necessarily mean that you interact with the financial layer. The beauty of proof of work and Bitcoin is that you can get Bitcoin without buying it from someone else. You can invest in some mining gear and get some rewards, and that's going to be your Bitcoin. It's not the most efficient way, but it's an indirect way, and it's really beautiful because in proof of stake systems, everything is pre-mined, and you basically buy coins from the wealthiest people in the system. If you don't want to do that, you can just mine. And in Bitcoin, you're going to be able to, let's say that you are in a country like Venezuela, where the electricity is cheap, but the inflation is high. If you get your hands on some sort of mining machine, you're going to be able to have some steady revenue, which helps you pay bills because the bills are pretty inexpensive in that country. So there is definitely the freedom aspect of it. It's just that I think it's becoming more expensive over time as both the mining difficulty keeps on going up. So one machine that you might be buying is not enough. It might make you maybe a couple of dollars a month. And there's also the transaction fee aspect of it, which is natural. In order for Bitcoin to become sustainable on the long term, it needs the fees to increase, or it needs for miners to collect more fees. Because every 4 years you have this halvening, that's what we call it, where the supply that becomes available through mining gets halved, gets split in half. So if you're going to have, in the beginning, Bitcoin was issuing 50 Bitcoins in every block. 4 years later, it was 25. Then 4 years later, it was 12.5. Now we're at 6.25. And next month, it's gonna become half of that. And for miners, this can be pretty brutal unless the price doubles every 4 years. So there needs to be a balance with fees, with users being willing to pay transaction fees to make up for the diminishing block reward. This is part of the controlled supply that's going to 21 million. Right now, I think we have about 19 something that's on the market. But yeah, it's still a free and a freedom system. It's just that it doesn't get promoted too much as such. You still benefit from all of the freedoms that the system grants you, but you have to educate yourself about it. And most likely this cycle and in the coming years, there's gonna be fewer people talking about this. As Bitcoin becomes more entwined with the mainstream financial system, it's gonna become even harder to figure out what's the point of this. People will just refer to the fixed supply and to the verifiable amount of coins that are out there. They will say, oh, the open ledger is so great, but they will forget why this project started in the first place. It wasn't, I mean, the first people who got into Bitcoin, maybe some of them saw dollar signs and thought, okay, I'm gonna get rich because there will only ever be 21 million of this, and look at me, I can get 50 just by mining with my laptop. But most of them were more ideologically driven, and they were trying to basically use a form of money that the government cannot control. They were trying to get off the dollar. They were trying to live off grid or do some sort of cypherpunk or anarchistic experimentation and project their own ideology into the world. And that was super cool while it lasted. Right now, I think there are fewer of these people, even though some of them might still have a lot of Bitcoin, so they have more freedom today than they had back in the day when they were sending to each other thousands of Bitcoin without knowing if it's worth anything or if it will ever be worth anything. But yes, you can still enjoy freedom with your Bitcoin, and it's beautiful.
I guess there are some elements of me that are a cypherpunk or an anarchist. Um, you know, you mentioned the halving. It's next month. What do you see happening as a result of it? What are miners going to have to do? Because there's going to be capitulation, right? How are they going to remain in business? How are they? How is Bitcoin going to continue to be, mined with this upcoming halving?
I think it's pretty convenient that the price doubled. So I'm not sure they will be affected as much as some people expect. We shouldn't forget that back in October the price was in in the range of 30,000, and as we speak right now it's around 70,000. So the price more than doubled. I think it makes up for the mining revenue. Of course, the amount of miners increased when the price increased, and when the reward is gonna go down, I think the least efficient miners are gonna drop. So the ones that don't have access to a sustainable form of electricity are not gonna be around for long. But I see a lot of initiatives, and I know that you're from the US. I know that there's this trend of mining centralization in the United States, and there's excessive regulations. But what's happening right now in Asia and Africa and Latin America with mining companies and individual miners going there and choosing these villages where they build the infrastructure, they pay locals to manage it, to protect it, and protect it not just physically but also politically with the local authorities. And it's really beautiful because this is sort of the point of Bitcoin, and this is what we always said would happen, and it's beautiful to see it happening. For many years, most of the mining happened in China, and this was happening for multiple reasons because manufacturing of chips mostly happens in China, and it was very easy for these devices to get shipped to nearby villages. And it was also because you had the Communist Party building these power plants. Sometimes there were water wheels and these sustainable ways of getting electricity. And they were planning ahead maybe for the next 50 years. So a lot of energy was getting produced and wasted. It was getting produced and there was no way to store it. So they found that they could use these Bitcoin miners to use that electricity and also bring some money to the local community. But after the Chinese kicked out most of the miners and there was a migration to the US, I think it was a very important step towards decentralizing Bitcoin mining and proving that it's resilient and it plays this geopolitical game. And now that it's in the US, every senator and their mom wants a share, wants to get a piece of the pie, get into this business and regulate it, over-regulate it, get as much money as they can from it while they can. And I think at one point it's not going to be super profitable. And the miners have some leverage, I think, because they are important for local communities. In some situations, they even use energy that is super wasteful, like converting methane, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but it's the emission from oil flares. So where they have these oil digging operations, there is a flare, and that one is very polluting, and you can actually turn that through a chemical process into hot air. And that's super cool because you take that methane, you turn it into electricity, and then you power up Bitcoin mining. That's super bullish. It's the best of this fossil fuel economy, and it's used in a creative way that actually helps the environment. But this is in the US. In the rest of the world, I think it's gonna get super competitive because prices for energy are lower. The only challenge is dealing with the local politicians. And in some situations, I guess you have to bribe them, especially if there is no framework for legislation or something regarding this. And to them, it seems like colonization or something like that. Just some foreigners who are rich coming into your community and trying to do stuff with your electricity infrastructure. But it does provide jobs. It does help bring some technological advancements into that community. And it will keep on happening, especially as these wealthy Western countries decide that they don't want mining and they think it's wasteful. Here in Europe, they're doing their best to discourage mining and say, no, it's bad for the environment. We should not be doing this. It's the same situation as with electric cars. They say, oh, we should not have any more combustion engine cars in cities. And then you ask them, okay, but what are we gonna do? Get electric cars? How is the grid going to support that? How how will the resources for lithium and all of these rare metals going to sustain a situation where we only have that? But they don't have answers for that. They just have virtue signaling. And I think at one point it's gonna strike them back. But until that point, it's useful to have alternatives. And the third world is waiting for these opportunities to make money, basically, to become part of the global economy. And the fact that Bitcoin provides them this opportunity and the mining industry is coming to their village or in their small city is really beautiful. And I'm hopeful that this will lead to some sort of rapid, accelerated development in a way that these communities are gonna get stronger, wealthier, and they're gonna be in a much better position to negotiate and to keep their position. It's beautiful, really. It's capitalism accelerated. All of the developments that we saw with the Industrial Revolution, now they're happening at a much larger scale with information floating around the world instantly and everyone wanting to become part of this. Well, except for some European countries and some US states, but and Canadian. But otherwise it's really interesting.
I love it. Capitalism expedited, immensely expedited around the world. That's great. There are some thoughts, with this upcoming halving that miners are going to have to do additional stuff, right? One of them is to be able to really make Bitcoin, DeFi, make it decentralized finance, or find ways to invest so that it becomes more decentralized finance, such as wrapping it in Ethereum, or offering it on Ethereum L2 chains, as DeFi products. How do you see uh, that happening, and what are your thoughts on perhaps a multi-chain world?
Well, the multi-chain world is a reality right now because Bitcoin does not scale and is not private enough. So there is a lot of room for experimentation, and there are lots of ideas out there, which to an extent is incredible. It just proves that people are interested in solving very sophisticated and complex problems. The problem with the multi-chain world is that if the project is useful, then you basically have an inflation to the expected 21 million coins. You have, for example, projects like Bitcoin Cash, which is a carbon copy of the original Bitcoin, which even has the copied UTXO set. So owners of BTC before the date of the 1st of August of 2017 can claim their BCH and become part of that network. And I think it exists for blackmailing purposes because it clearly did not get traction. It's clearly not the real Bitcoin, but it's there and it has lower fees and it has 21 million coins of its own and people can buy into that. And then there's Litecoin, which has been around for almost 13 years now. And that one is a different beast in some ways because it has its own hashing algorithm. It has its own monetary policy, even if it's very similar with Bitcoins. And that one is super useful. It's being used by merchants in the US for its low fees and for the fact that it's pretty not stable in the sense of monetary stable, but it's a network that has 100% uptime and people can use it anytime for sending money cheap around the world. And for payments processing, that's pretty useful. So there are all of these use cases and there are all of these blockchains that are being used for them. I don't see that going away maybe in the next decade, but as Bitcoin matures and the community figures out that they should be having more of these features, it will also be, I think we'll have a situation where it becomes more clear how you're going to add these features. Right now, when you say, let's add privacy to Bitcoin, most of the proposals that exist out there have large transactions, meaning that the cryptography behind privacy makes everything more cumbersome, slower, and more costly, and it occupies more block space. That's not the elegant design for which Bitcoin is looking. But there are some current experiments. For example, in Zcash, they have these mixing pools where the average transaction, they made it almost to the size of the average Bitcoin transaction. And once it becomes much smaller, I think that's going to be discussed within the Bitcoin community because Bitcoin and Zcash are very similar in design. And I think that was on purpose. The people behind Zcash were very early Bitcoin adopters and they wanted to see how they can use zero knowledge proofs for this purpose. For scaling, that's going to be more delicate because the community has this sort of PTSD from the scaling wars that took place in 2017. And they think that increasing the block size is a bad idea, even if it's within reasonable and well documented and researched limits. Because at one point when Bitcoin was more centralized, there was Gavin Andresen. He was the maintainer of the project and the chief scientist or whatever of the Bitcoin Foundation. And he was trying to push this idea that every few years, the block size should double, just like Moore's Law. And it was excessive in a sense, but at the same time, you have to understand that storage becomes more cheap, internet becomes faster, and some of the excuses for running a node and stuff like that, making it harder, they don't hold water after a while. If you tell people, yeah, 1 megabyte is reasonable because everyone, even in the middle of the desert, can synchronize a node in 10 minutes, that's pretty reasonable. But when you think about it, 5G internet is getting more widespread, and maybe that Bitcoin could use some sort of block size increase for the purpose of allowing more users to access it non-custodially and basically have more transactions that pay fees. I think that can be beneficial. Of course, some people right now will say, well, if we have more space for transactions, they're going to be used for storing JPEGs, and the ordinal inscription people are going to take advantage of the cheaper block space to use it for that purpose. But I don't see any issue with more users, you know? I think Bitcoin is competitive and Bitcoin is permissionless. And anyone around the world, regardless of reasons, can use it. That's beautiful. I don't think we've ever had that. And it's something aspirational. It's something that the pirates of the 17th century and 18th century really wanted to have, a form of money that the government cannot control and that they can use. Sometimes I think of Bitcoin as pirate money because it leads to these parallel economies and it builds stuff. But unfortunately, right now, these altcoins are useful to scale and to make Bitcoin private and to experiment with features. I don't see them staying around for too long. Even Ethereum, as solid as it seems right now, because it has, I guess they did something smart with paying developers and investing in these development studios. I think it's being challenged very profoundly right now by Solana. And it's interesting because most of the concerns that they had about centralization are being proved somewhat wrong by Solana. And Solana is like, yeah, we don't care that it's centralized. We're trying to provide features and we want to make this cheap. And we're gonna keep regulators at bay. We're gonna prove that we're not a security and stuff like that with huge legal teams and whatever. Of course, it's a security, but the process of going through all the steps can take years. And by that time, it's likely that they can figure out something that can help them sustain the system and make it less centralized. I don't know, I'm speculating at this point, but the only constant over the last 15 years has been Bitcoin. I'm not sure about anything else, but Bitcoin is getting increasingly better at incorporating features from other chains, either on second layers or side chains or off-chain solutions. Like there's BitVM, which is a way to do computation off-chain. Ethereum right now does computation on-chain and stores all of that computation forever in full nodes. Bitcoin is trying to do that off-chain, and I think it's really beautiful because it opens up lots of use cases that previously were not considered for Bitcoin. And we're gonna have much better contracts. We're gonna have maybe trust minimized sidechains because so far sidechains have been sort of like federations where you had to trust some companies that operate the nodes. Now it's gonna get much better. And whether or not in the next 10 years we're gonna talk about a multi-chain world, that's debatable, but there's always room for experimenting with new features. And I guess for that purpose, there will always be more blockchains. Until, I guess, we figure out a way to do censorship resistant internet money without blockchains. But that's like $1 trillion problem to solve.
Maybe multi-trillion dollars. So wow, thank you. Yeah, I understand that off code. I was in my corporate days an efficiency guy in technology where I would take stuff out of the code and put it in mapping tables, so I completely get and understand what's going on with the, off code. It's important for efficiency. So I want to I want to thank you very, very much for coming on today. I enjoyed speaking with you and I learned a lot and appreciate it greatly. I have one last question, and it's probably easy. So, how can people find out more information about you? How can they find out more information about the Bitcoin Takeover podcast? How can they become listeners? How can they do that? And also, you're coming to the Litecoin summit in July. How can they see you speak there?
Yeah, so first of all, go to btctkvr.com. That's an abbreviation for Bitcoin Takeover. If you want to take the long route, you can also type Bitcoin Takeover podcast into your search engine. You're going to find it. I have more than 200 episodes, which I published in the last 5 years. All of them are interviews with very interesting people. You're gonna find something you like. I'm pretty sure. You're gonna find some big names that you might have heard of. You're gonna find small names that are worth discovering. And it's a pretty cool project. And it's not because of me. I don't consider myself a cool person, but I do have some of the best guests, and I'm super humbled by their presence and by the fact that they shared their knowledge with me. I think podcasting, and you're going to agree with me on this one, is a very selfish way of getting information from people who maybe spent tens, hundreds, thousands of hours researching something. And then you get that in a 1 hour format, you get some answers, and you're going to be a much smarter person afterwards. You're going to be able to navigate into the unknown with more certainties than before. And that's really beautiful. I also regard podcasting as being for first and foremost for myself, for my own learning, for my own growing, for my ability to understand what's going on and to keep myself updated with insights from people who are much smarter than I'll ever be. And yeah, that's what Bitcoin Takeover podcast is all about. If you are into learning about Bitcoin and you have questions or concerns and you're afraid to get into it, I created the Breaking FUD magazine. On the Bitcoin Takeover website, you have the magazine section. I have 3 of them right now that I published each year since I started doing magazines. And you can download them for free. You can print them, you can sell them, I don't care. I publish them under an open source license. And the point of them is to spread knowledge and to find a way for this information to get across. And the beauty of open source is that once you publish it, it takes a life of its own. It's gonna be available out there. There's a Spanish translation of my work, there's a French translation, there's a German translation, there's someone working on an Italian translation, and you never know what's going to happen in the future and where this content is going to end up. And I'm super happy that I'm able to help some communities. I know that some of my magazines were distributed in El Salvador to locals, and I guess they learned a little bit about Bitcoin from my work, which was translated to Spanish by somebody. That's very beautiful. You can do that, of course, if you're listening to this, you're fluent in English, so you can read the originals. And once again, they're on the Bitcoin Takeover website, btctkvr.com. As for the Litecoin Summit, I got invited to speak to that one. I'm gonna speak specifically about Bitcoin maximalism and where it sits in this debate about altcoins and to which extent altcoins are still relevant. I think Litecoin is very interesting for Bitcoin because it activated SegWit in a time when Bitcoiners were saying that SegWit is not safe. They even went as far as putting one SegWit address out there with a bounty of $1 million. And if anyone could break and find some vulnerability in that, they could take the money. To this date, nobody was able to do that, which proves that SegWit as an upgrade was a safe choice. Litecoin also was the first network to do a mainnet Lightning Network transaction, and it was considered to be a contender for a long time for the Lightning Network. It's just that it didn't get too much traction on Litecoin, specifically because the fees are so low that it makes no economical sense to bother opening and closing channels and stuff like that. But right now, Litecoin is also doing some interesting experimentation with a Mimblewimble extension block, or what they call the MWeb. And that one adds both privacy and scalability to the protocol. It's a proposal that was first introduced in 2016 for Bitcoin, and they were able to figure out how to put it into practice. And to me, it's interesting. I want to learn more about that. I'm invited to speak. I'm super honored to be part of the Nashville scene. I'm also going to the Bitcoin conference that takes place in Nashville just after the Litecoin conference. So for me, it's the perfect storm. I can attend both events. And I need to get a visa to travel to the US. So it's hard to even get there. Maybe I should go to the Mexican border or something and just walk in. That's much easier for some reason. But yeah, I hope I'll see you there. If you're listening to this, I hope you're coming to the Litecoin Summit or to the Bitcoin conference by Bitcoin Magazine. And yeah, that's how you can follow my work. I'm always excited about Bitcoin and everything that's new about it, and you should be too.
Awesome. 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 Thank you very much for your time today.